Mm-hmm. Okay, great. So, dear colleagues, nice to meet you all. My name is Anastasia Kvetchkova. I'm Deputy Head of the Asia-Pacific sector in the Center of Comprehensive International and European Studies and the Academic Advisor of International Relations Program at HSC. Today we have a session that is dedicated to Chinese humanitarian aid in the era of digitalization, breakthroughs and constraints. I guess it's very interesting and fascinating topics for everyone, and let us dig into it today, and I'm sure that we'll learn many interesting details. We have several speakers, and we have a truly international panel today. So the first speaker would be Chжan Dэнхуa, PhD, research fellow at the Coral Bell School of Asia-Pacific Affairs from Australian National University. Then we'll have a report from HSC Junior Research Fellows, Veronika Smirnova and Alexandra Yankova. And we have an opportunity today to have a discussant in our panel, Lina Gun from Nanyang Technological University, Singapore. So let us start the panel, and please, Chжan Dэнhua, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Let me share my screen first. Can you all see this?
Yeah, everything is fine.
Okay, sure. Yeah.
Yes, we see.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dэнhua. Yeah. And before I start, I just want to express my thanks to the host for having me here. I think it's a really good opportunity just to share my research findings on this topic with you. And my research mainly focus on Chinese foreign aid and also foreign policy, especially in the Asia Pacific region, especially the Pacific Islands. And I finished my PhD at ANU, Australian National University, mainly on Chinese trilateral aid cooperation, yeah, a few years ago. So very nice to be here. Just give me a second. So this slide here will give you a general idea of the history of the Chinese foreign aid. For example, in the period between the 1950 to the 1978, in this period, the Chinese foreign aid was mainly the ideology-based. It was dominated by the political interest, that is, China was a socialist country. And so in this period, Chinese foreign aid focused on the bilateral aid. And then in the next period, that is from the late 1970s to the 1999, the national interest has shifted to the domestic economic development. And this also affected the Chinese foreign aid delivery. So that means in this period, Chinese foreign aid was more driven by the development interest. And then in the last period, that is from in the last 2 decades, as China has become a rising great power. In this period, the global image building has become a priority, or has become the objective for China as an emerging donor. So as I said, in this period, global Chinese foreign aid has been driven largely by the global responsibility, or to build a good global image as a responsible stakeholder and a rising great power. And this also affects Chinese humanitarian assistance. For example, in this period, especially in the past 10 years, China has started to pilot a new type of aid delivery, that is the trilateral aid cooperation, that China was willing to conduct the aid cooperation with traditional donor states or a UN agency and also with a third party, that is the recipient country. So this is a very brief history of the Chinese foreign aid delivery. Excuse me. And this slide here gives you an idea of the Chinese foreign aid spending. And these figures on the left, they are based on the Chinese 3 white papers on foreign aid released by the Chinese government. And although these numbers might be underreported, it still gives us an idea and that Chinese foreign aid has increased significantly. For example, according to if we look at the figure on the right, we can say that China has become one of the largest donor, even compared with with DEC donors, the traditional donors. For example, since the year 2012, China has become the sixth largest donor globally. And starting from this slide, I'm going to share with you some of my research on the Chinese humanitarian aid. For example, in terms of history, China established a coordination system on its emergent humanitarian assistance since the year 2004, because in December 2004, the devastating tsunami in the Indian Ocean occurred. And after that, the Chinese government established the coordination system and started and provided a large amounts of humanitarian assistance to those countries affected by this natural disaster. And in terms of the stakeholders, as you may know that in China, more than 3 dozens of the ministerial level agencies, they are involved in Chinese foreign aid delivery. And in terms of the Chinese humanitarian aid coordination system, also a number of the ministries, they are involved. For example, the newly established the Chinese aid agency, CITCA, the China International Development Cooperation Agency, CITCA, and also the military, PLA, People's Liberation Army, and also the Ministries of Foreign Affairs, and also Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Finance or Ministry of Health, and also the China Earthquake Administration, as well as some other ministerial level agencies, such as the Civil Aviation Administrations. They are all involved in Chinese humanitarian coordination system. And it is also encouraging that in recent years, those non-state actors, NGOs in China, they have also shown growing interest in involving in the international humanitarian assistance. And some of them have become more and more active in international operations. And this slide, which is based on a report I co-authored, gives us an idea of the Chinese humanitarian assistance in the period between 2009 to 2018. We can see that on the top of this slide, that here are some other top 5 crises funded by Chinese the humanitarian assistance. And also in the middle part of the slide, we can see those recipients, those main recipients of the Chinese the humanitarian assistance. For example, China mainly provides humanitarian assistance bilaterally. That means the national governments in the recipient countries, they received more than half of the Chinese total humanitarian assistance in this period. And the second largest recipient of the Chinese humanitarian aid are those UN agencies. So that means UN agencies has become one of the most important partner in Chinese humanitarian assistance. And the last part of the slide gives us an idea of the Chinese humanitarian funding in the different years. And this also shows the fluctuation of the Chinese humanitarian assistance over the years. And this slide just give us some idea. Just give us an idea of the Chinese position as a provider of humanitarian assistance compared with those traditional donors. And so that means, although China has become an important provider of humanitarian assistance, it is still not that important. It's still not that important compared with the traditional donors, for example, in the Asia region, in Asia, and also in the Pacific region. So what are some of the differences in humanitarian assistance between China and those traditional donors or donor states? For example, in terms of the conceptual approach, China focuses aid on the South-South cooperation, and humanitarian assistance is regarded by the Chinese government as one of the 8 components of the Chinese foreign aid. And in terms of funding, as I just mentioned, although China has become the most important provider of humanitarian assistance in non-traditional donor states, but if compared with traditional donors, the volume of Chinese humanitarian assistance is still quite limited. And in terms of the delivery modes, I've just also mentioned that China mainly focuses on providing humanitarian assistance in a bilateral way. That is, China just provides its humanitarian assistance to recipient country directly. And also, Chinese humanitarian assistance focus on the disaster relief. That means after the occurrence of the natural disasters, the China will provide either the grants or the in-kind donations or in-kind supports to the recipient country. But China has been very careful or very, very cautious in terms of providing humanitarian assistance to address the social unrest or social crisis, because it does not want to be seen as interfering in the domestic issues of the partner countries. And I think the Chinese approach to the humanitarian assistance can offer some opportunities, and also it also has some challenges in international humanitarian reform. For example, in terms of localization, China focuses on the government-to-government approach. Its relations, it's many channels the humanitarian assistance through the recipient governments, and I think that's good and bad. The good side is that sometimes it can provide very, very timely the delivery of assistance to the recipient country, but the downside is that the China's engagement with those non-government, the actors in recipient countries could be quite limited, especially those NGOs or civil society organizations. And also in terms of the humanitarian and development nexus, the Chinese government, they prioritize the importance of development to reduce the humanitarian needs. And also the China-funded infrastructure projects, they have supported the delivery of humanitarian assistance to those remote areas in the partner countries. And also they can also link to the communities and improve the access to markets during and after those natural disasters. So this is about the humanitarian and development relations. And also the last part is that China has become one of the largest donors. And also the involving China in international humanitarian assistance will naturally diversify and also increase the resources that is available for humanitarian assistance. And also China has developed their own expertise in humanitarian assistance. And I think some of these experiences and expertise can also be useful in international humanitarian assistance. And this slide here is about the newly established the CITICA, the China International Development Cooperation Agency, established in April 2018. Its objectives were very clear. That is, China will use foreign aid, including humanitarian assistance, to support Chinese major power diplomacy or to support Chinese foreign policy. And also, the Chinese government has made it very clear that they will use this new aid agency to support the rollout of the Belt and the Road Initiative which is now one of the most important initiatives in the Xi Jinping era. And this slide gives you some idea of the COVID-19 diplomacy in the past 2 years. And here I've listed some of the main activities conducted by China in this period. For example, China has been providing the grants and also donations, such as the donation of medical supplies, and also the China-made vaccines to the partner countries. For example, the photo on the right, on the top, sorry, it is the Chinese donation of the vaccines to Laos, which has become a very close ally of China in the Southeast Asia. And the second main type of the Chinese activity during the COVID-19 period, is that Chinese government has held a growing number of those online communication, such as the online meetings with the counterparts. And I have for the photo on the right is for example, gives you an idea, is the example of the second vice ministerial special meeting between China and those small Pacific Island countries on the COVID-19. And the third type of the Chinese COVID-19 activity is that the Chinese ambassadors on the ground has been very busy and very active in reaching out to the mainstream media in the partner countries, just to demonstrate the Chinese success in containing the virus at home, and also to pledge, to reaffirm the Chinese readiness to support the partner countries in battling this COVID-19 virus, the pandemic. And also, the Chinese government has taken a whole of government approach to address or tackle this COVID-19, the pandemic. That means Chinese diaspora and also those Chinese, the overseas, the medical teams, and also those Chinese, the companies, they are also involved in Chinese COVID-19 diplomacy, supporting the government's position. And this slide is about how China and traditional donors or traditional actors how can they engage on humanitarian action. And for example, I think in terms of the coordination, in the report I co-authored, we mentioned that maybe it's a good way to include the humanitarian assistance on the agenda of those high-level meetings between China and traditional partner countries, trying to identify opportunities for cooperation in this area. And also, in terms of the trilateral aid cooperation, I think there is potential for the trilateral cooperation between China and traditional actors, but in recent years, because of the intensified or the heightened geostrategic competition between China and traditional donors, the trilateral cooperation has become less likely or become more and more difficult. But there are still opportunities. And let's move on because of time constraint. Here, I just give you we have two photos, give you two examples of the Chinese trilateral aid cooperation. The photo on the left is the China, Malawi, and UNDP trilateral cooperation on disaster risk reduction. It's a small pilot project, and the funding mainly come from China, from the MOFCOM. And the photo on the right is not directly related to the humanitarian assistance. This project is between China and the Australian government, and also the Papua New Guinea, that is an island country in the Pacific. So the China, Australia, and PNG, Papua New Guinea, they conducted this trilateral cooperation on malaria control. And this project, the Chinese sides mainly provide the medical experts and also expertise, and the Australian side mainly provide funding support for this project. And again, this is a pilot project, and this project was conducted in the year 2016. And so I mentioned it's a good start for the trust building, this type of the trilateral aid cooperation, but now it's getting more and more difficult because of the growing geostrategic competition between China and traditional donor states in the Indo-Pacific or in the Asia-Pacific region. And this is my last slide. That gives you an idea of the Chinese positions on the trilateral aid cooperation. For example, China has not issued a clear policy on this the modality on this trilateral aid cooperation. And also, the Chinese government is open to the trilateral aid cooperation, but they are still very, very cautious because the trilateral aid cooperation is still new to China. And thirdly, the Chinese government does not actively push for the trilateral cooperation. And fourthly, actually, the first point was repeatedly highlighted by the Chinese government, including the new aid agency CIDCA. So that means they said they will give positive consideration to proposals supported and better initiated by the recipient countries. And so that's the highlight to this principle of the raised, agreed, and better led by the recipient countries. And another point is that the Chinese government deals with the trilateral aid proposals on a case-by-case basis. And the next point is that the Chinese government, they are still testing this trilateral aid cooperation. As I said, it's still quite new. And they have been very, very selective in terms of the partners, traditional donor states, and also the multilateral agencies. And a last point I want to mention is that, as I mentioned, in recent years, because of the geostrategic competition between China and traditional donor states, it is getting more and more difficult for China to conduct trilateral aid cooperation with the traditional donor states, such as the US, such as Australia, or such as New Zealand. And then China, currently, they are focusing on the trilateral cooperation with UN agencies, with the multilateral agencies. So that has become a new focus for China in conducting trilateral aid cooperation. And to me, that means that there is potential for China, or there is great potential for China and the multilateral agencies, especially UN agencies, to conduct trilateral cooperation on the humanitarian assistance. And here I have provided a link to my book on the Chinese trilateral aid cooperation. Yeah, so I will stop here and really look forward to your comments and advice. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was a fascinating report. Just a couple of follow-up questions, and we'll move to another presentation. Could you please summarize the key factors of Chinese success in humanitarian aid? Because you've talked about its enlargement. Maybe another follow-up question, what is your assessment of Chinese humanitarian aid?
Excuse me, sorry, what's the first question?
Yeah, what are the key factors of success in China's humanitarian aid? Why are we talking of its enlargement? And well, actually, and do you think it is efficient and successful? What is your assessment?
Sure, I think there are several reasons that why China increase its humanitarian assistance, and also I think this is related to the reasons or the key factors. Firstly, that China has become a major donor internationally, and in particular in the past 2 decades, let's say since the year 2000, the Chinese foreign aid volume in general, they have increased significantly. And also because the humanitarian assistance, as I mentioned, is one of the 8 main categories of the Chinese aid. So the the allocation for the humanitarian assistance has also increased. And second, I think the key factor in Chinese humanitarian assistance is that it has built up, it has, how to say, obtained their experience based on the Chinese own domestic humanitarian, how to say, the operations, such as how China responds to those the natural disasters back at home, after earthquakes, after the flooding, or after the droughts. And that can, and China actually, this experience built on the domestic the experience has also, how do you say, guide the Chinese practice international humanitarian assistance. For example, as I mentioned, China trying to focus on the nexus between the development and the humanitarian assistance, and China, the Chinese government insists that the development, especially economic development, should be the solution or the ultimate solution to reduce the humanitarian assistance. To reduce humanitarian aid needs. And let's say another key factor in Chinese enlargement of the Chinese humanitarian assistance is I think, as I mentioned, I think in the past two decades, the Chinese government has started to focus more on the global image building as one of the main motives behind the foreign aid, including humanitarian aid, the delivery. And because they have become, if you want to be seen as a superpower, in addition to, you need to demonstrate, how do you say, you need to build a good image, demonstrate that you are a responsible stakeholder. Yeah, so I think that's another reason. And more recently, because the Chinese government, they have launched this ambitious Belt and Road initiative. They have also used foreign aid, including the humanitarian assistance, to support or to facilitate Chinese rollout of the Belt and Road initiative. I think Belt and Road is not only related to those economic projects. It's also, how to say, it is also conducive for image building. And if we have chance to look at those components of the Belt and Road, they also include, they said they have 5 components, 5 the connectivity, one is about the people-to-people links. Yeah, so I think humanitarian assistance, they can serve the purpose in supporting the Chinese Belt and Road.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah, that was a very interesting comment. And what especially intrigued me was your comment on Chinese image, because I think in the media sometimes there's really controversial. And on the one hand, yeah, we see that China is doing great things. And you have mentioned several crises where China was involved in supporting different countries, Syria and others, Pakistan, in dealing with the issues. But on the one hand, we see that media coverage still is sometimes really negative. But my suggestion would be to go back to this question in the discussion part, and then we'll proceed to our next report. Please, Veronica, Alexandra, could you please start your part of the discussion and tell us more on digitalization and Chinese humanitarian aid?
Hello, dear participants. My colleague Alexandra Nikova and I, Veronica Smirnova, will provide more details on China's engagement in the digital sphere concerning the humanitarian aid, and we will try to track some new trends and evaluate whether the presence of China in the digital sphere is large and whether it could enhance more. The trend of the digitalization of humanitarian aid is becoming more visible as such technologies as artificial intelligence, big data, Internet of Things, digital payments, and others help humanitarian agencies to provide a more efficient and assistance, and what is more importantly, it may be delivered remotely, which is especially important in the COVID-19 times. The digital technologies are becoming more widespread, and it is proved by such examples that several initiatives such as UN Global Files, the UN Secretary General Initiative on Big Data and Artificial Intelligence Sustainable Development Use are developing, and it is also visible on the level of national governments. For example, the USAID has issued the digital strategy, in which it also covers the use of digital technologies in providing humanitarian aid. Another important issue is the ethics, the data privacy, because data protection is especially a sensible issue when it comes to humanitarian aid, as people's lives rely on this factor, and as the famous quote said, we kill based on metadata. And that is why it's especially important to develop ethical principles in this sphere, and some enthusiasts, for example, aviators have developed the code of conduct for the ethical use of drones. As for China, we may observe that this tendency is also maybe also found in its new aid strategy. It was published on the January 2021, and it is entitled China's International Development Cooperation in the New Era. And interestingly, it differs significantly from the two previous papers, as the 2021 version not only provides as a summary of what China has done in previous years, but also outlines a forward-looking perspective. Notably, China's emergency humanitarian aid is covered in a separate chapter entitled Responding to Global Humanitarian Challenges Together. And the part on improving disaster preparation and mitigation describes China's participation in a number of joint projects. You may see them on the slide. And these projects utilize monitoring systems to predict natural disasters and drones. Besides suggestions sometimes to use digital innovations to respond to emergencies, sometimes are raised within specific frameworks. For example, the necessity to use digital technologies to enhance cooperation in COVID-19 response were mentioned during the special ASEAN+3 summit on coronavirus disease in 2019. Though the white paper doesn't contain a specific part covering the issue of digital innovations, China steadily builds up its stage capabilities, which is obvious, and they may be utilized for its humanitarian assistance as well in the future. The main focus appears to be on the artificial intelligence development. For example, in 2017, China released the counter strategy for the development of artificial intelligence, which outlines its ambitious aim to become the world leader in artificial intelligence by 2030. And more interestingly, in September 2021, China also issued the Artificial Intelligence Code of Ethics, and it emphasizes the power of decisions of humans over machines. And this tendency is in line with humanitarian agencies' adherence to preserving the human-centered humanitarian processes, as there are concerns that the digitalization may make this process detached from human decision process. And on the other hand, China's strategy of military civil fusion is also a driver for innovation introduction. And on the example of civil-military integration industry alliance, which unites the developments in military and civil spheres, we may see that big data and artificial intelligence and drones are among top 5 areas of the Alliance science and technology achievements. So these areas are steadily developing and may bring input to China's humanitarian aid from the digital perspective in the future. Along with this, a feature of the digital age is that most of the innovation comes from the private sector. And immersion into several cases of the Chinese companies' involvement in humanitarian innovations could provide a bigger picture on our research. One of the largest cases is Alibaba Cloud partnership with the World Food Program. One of the most important results of this partnership is that the parties have developed a hunger map live. The map pulls together publicly accessible data from various sources such as food security, weather, population size, conflict hazards, nutrition, and macroeconomic data to track and predict hunger in near real time. While the World Food Program in this partnership provided acquired data, Alibaba Cloud provided its innovation in machine learning and artificial intelligence to learn the algorithm to predict the future situation. At the same time, Alibaba is also among top non-UN entities that provided technology solutions for addressing the COVID-19 pandemic in response to the call of 2030 Connect. It is the UN initiative which develops online technology platform for sustainable development goals. And it was among top Asia donators of these technologies. The presence of the Chinese companies is also visible in the sphere of drones. For example, DJI is considered to be the world leader. Its share now is 54% in the sphere of development and manufacturing civilian drones. Interestingly, the company puts efforts to promote the drones for good idea. For instance, DJI has developed a rescue map to share the stories of those saved by drones, regardless of their manufacturer. And for example, when I checked this map for the seminar, I found the story of a man lost in a Nepal, and drones rescued him alive, providing food and water while the rescue team was searching for him. And DJI also supports competitions for companies developing drones and the relevance of fair for humanitarian sphere purposes. It was a sponsor of the award for drone missions to help people, animals, and the environment within the RFC Excellence Humanitarian Award. And it also collaborates with various national agencies, among which the European Emergency Number Association and, for example, also Los Angeles Fire Department. The issue is that various companies are afraid of data privacy issues, and in this regard, the US Army was prohibited to use DJI drones, and in order to promote cooperation in this sphere, DJI not only tries to build this positive image of drones usage, but also issues guidelines how to prove the public that drones are the good idea when it comes to rescue operations. And more interestingly, DJI contributed to developing crisis mapping in Nepal in collaboration with several agencies. After the earthquake, several enthusiasts put efforts to provide drone training to locals and to demonstrate the potential use of drone imagery in disaster response to use them in the future to better assist to post-disaster reconstruction. And now I give the floor to my colleague, Alexandra. Please continue.
Thank you so much, dear colleagues. I hope you hear me well. I will concentrate mostly on the research sphere and on two cases that are provided in this field. The first one is connected with International Research Center of Big Data for Sustainable Development Goals. The center was introduced in Beijing in September this year, so that it is very new. And the center, it relies mostly on the construction of Chinese Academy of Science. And it is, it was a governmental initiative of China. For example, we see that Xi Jinping announced setting up this research center by himself at the 75th United Nations General Assembly. And we can say about this center that it is the world's first international scientific research institution which uses big data to facilitate the implementation of United Nations Agenda for Sustainable Development. And its main goal is to create an integrated big data cloud service system platform. Although the center is rather new, but we already know that it established a comprehensive display and cross-integration global monitoring and evaluation system, which provide relevant UN agencies and some member states even with data sharing, technological assistance, and even decision-making support. To be more concrete, it can provide one-stop data calculation, analysis, sharing services, and some data public products for different users, such as, for example, public, decision makers, scientific researchers, and so on. By the way, this center is similar to Accelerator Lab, which were produced by United Nations Development Program, but it has more digital specialization. It is interesting that the center uses mostly big data, Big data, which is a type of big data associated with earth sciences, and nowadays they are widely used in sustainable development goals research. This type of data, big data, mainly includes satellite remote sensing data, sensor network data, social and economic statistics data, of course, opinion and behavior data, and some survey data. And this big data can further improve the coverage of monitoring indicators by producing more timely and more specific data for different organizations. We also know that, I'm sorry, please, next slide. Thank you. We also know that the center employs a large number of researchers, including big data analysts, engineers, and designers. And all these employees, they not only produce and provide some data sets, but also create specific developments and inventions to help to collect this data. For example, cameras for photographic surveying and some drone platforms and so on. Please, next slide. Thank you. Next slide. Thank you. And some words about the second initiative, the second case. The last but not the least, it is UNICEF Tsinghua Global Innovation Center for Children. This topic started in 2016 when Tsinghua University and UNICEF announced a new long-term partnership to leverage the use of innovations and technology in order to help to reach some of the poorest and the most disadvantaged children in China and beyond. And this partnership was aimed mostly to create a human-centered open source products and services to support these children and women. This partnership was signed after 2 years of cooperation between this university and UNICEF, and by that point it has already included some initiative. For example, the year's focused design for UNICEF class, which exposed young people to some of the real challenges and potential solutions, as well as year's innovation forum, which brought together young innovators from the global south and was firstly introduced in 2015. But the most important case within this partnership was exactly this Global Innovation Center for Children, which was established also in 2016. And the center was aimed to create products, to create digital products and services to improve the well-being of, again, the children in China and beyond. We don't know a lot about this center, but we know that it aims to use innovation to leverage cross-sectional collaboration from scholarship, young people, and the private sector. And as well, it is also is aimed to facilitate the South-South cooperation. It is interesting that the main task of this center is to identify some projects, products, and services which has already been developed in China, and which can potentially improve the welfare, public services, and governance in this country, and which can evaluate, and the center was aimed to evaluate the potential of these projects, the potential to be adapted in the country, and not only China, but also within South-South cooperation. So that we see that this center has some pragmatic interests, for example, promoting Chinese digital innovations, products, and services. Again, the official website of this center and some other website don't provide the full, complete information about the programs and activities within its work, but we know that a wide range of these activities are still under the development. So although the center worked already for 5 years, it doesn't have a lot of results still, unfortunately. But what we can already mention includes the following. The center, for example, for instance, the center established across disciplinary teams, which now work together with partners and stakeholders from China and from other Asian countries. Thus far, the center has initiated programs in inclusive learning, for example, and also it created 4 expert panels which provide digital decisions in the field of child psychology, renewable energy, and some medical devices, and some biomedical research based on children's health. Please, next slide. Thank you. Next slide again, because I have already thought about this. Yes, this one. And just some words about ethics in this field, in the field of these digital cases. We know that in China there is a phenomenon of big regulation of data collection, and on the one hand, this fact allows the Chinese internet industry to accumulate a huge amount of user data and all complete data necessary for artificial intelligence research and for the big data research. But on the other hand, this phenomenon raises concerns about the world community. this fact raises concerns among the world community about the violation of human rights and digital ethics. And by the way, the ongoing pandemic of COVID-19 is overwhelming the debate about this data and privacy in China, as in order to control the pandemics, the Chinese government collects a huge amount of individual information and data to monitor them, to monitor data on health and location of the population. So this also is a matter of concern for international community, especially among international organizations. So that we are facing an ethical problem here. We understand that in the framework of digital humanitarian projects, weak regulation of data collection in China is mostly a positive moment, as it allows international organizations in China to assess a more complete volume of national data. But we see that if the pressure from the Western community turns out to be too strong, this area will have to be limited, even in China. And we see already that the Chinese law on the protection of personal information and data security has already entered into force this year. And it is a good example of the fact that China is still trying to follow this so-called trend on data protection. I'm sorry, please, next slide. Let's see. Okay, we can stop here, and I will tell some words again about the conclusion of our topic, as it is mostly connected to this ethics. So it will be logical conclusion of our research. We can say, as I have already mentioned, that the fact that China is paying more and more attention to the ethics in the field of artificial intelligence, and the fact that a new law about the data protection has been adopted recently. This fact led us to suggest that China adheres to this above-mentioned whole trend of data and information privacy. And this trend and the development of legislation within its framework in China may complicate the collection of data in this country, and thereby even hamper the work of this Chinese digital humanitarian projects, which we have already talked about. But at the same time, there's difficulties within the collection of data in China would influence the work of other international organizations, the collection of data within the framework of this international organization, as this weak regulation of data collection in China is a positive moment only for China and only for Chinese government, which have access for this data, and for Chinese international organizations which are stated in China, because they cooperate with these governmental agencies. So that we see that there is no need for international community, for international organizations to stop this trend to data privacy in China, so that we can conclude that that in the nearest future, China will pay more and more attention to control this data collection, and it will be harder for these cases to work on data analysis. And another conclusion is about also about these cases. We can see that cases which I have mentioned, they are mostly governmental initiatives, and other cases that have also strong governmental support from the People's Republic of China. And why did the support is within the work of these cases? Because China has a very specific and pragmatic interests in these humanitarian projects. For example, in the case of Center for Sustainable Development Goals, we see that China initiated to create this and pay a lot of money for data collection in order to take a leadership position in the building of a new digital Silk Road. So we see that the biggest Chinese interest here is digital Silk Road. And again, about all other cases, we see that the pragmatic interest of China is taking leadership position in the cooperation, in the South-South cooperation, and in the humanitarian processes in the world. So again, we can conclude that China is doing so much about these digital humanitarian projects because it has big ambitions within the international cooperation. I guess that's all for my part. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much. I guess you've highlighted many opportunities for humanitarian aid development in the era of digitalization. And I think what is especially interesting and unusual that you focused on the role of business and the role of universities in this program. So it is not only about government bodies or government bodies related organizations, but also about the impact of a broader spectrum of actors. So now I'd like to give the floor to the discussant of our panel, Professor Lina Gun. Dear Professor, please, what kind of ideas and comments do you have after the two reports that we have listened to?
Thank you for the opportunity to participate in this very interesting and timely discussion, as we have heard from the two or three speakers about the trends in relation to China's growing role in the humanitarian community or humanitarian affairs. So I'd like to maybe made a few additional points to what the three speakers have said. First, with regard to Dr. Chжан Dэнхуa's presentation, I totally agree with his observation that China has increased its humanitarian aid substantively in the past few years. And however, it remains modest if you compare the amount or size of China's humanitarian aid with other traditional donors. The second point is that China has prioritized aid to certain issues over some others. As Dэнhua just mentioned, China focuses more on responding to natural hazards over refugee crisis, as well as conflict-induced situations, largely due to the concerns of political concerns. And within the because within the humanitarian system, there are clusters, food, health, education, shelter, etc. According to the data I collected from the UN system, China, the World Food Organization program is the top destination of China's donations or contributions to the UN system, and it is followed by health. So these two sectors, if you compare with shelter and others, are less sensitive, in my observation, for China to engage. So China focuses on food and health issues. And the second trend I observe is that since I believe 2013, China also started its contribution to refugee issues. From what I collected from the UN system, China increased its support or contribution to the World, the Refugee Agency, UNHCR, in recent years. I can't remember specifically the number, but for example, if China made 11 donations between 2001 till 2020, at least 8 out of the 11 were made after, I think, 2017. And UNHCR has already received support for its projects from China South-South Cooperation Fund. The number of projects got sponsored by China is not much lower than other agencies such as UNDP, etc. So China has increased its collaboration with UN agencies on issues such as refugees, although I believe they are still in a very cautious approach and still trying to explore the territory to see how it can fit in the landscape without losing its or defeating its own principle. And another trend I observe is that, feature I observe is the difference in practices. As Dэнhua mentioned that China always emphasizes a lack of development is a root cause of many humanitarian crises. But from my conversation with some Chinese practitioners earlier this year, the observation is that actually in reality, in practice, China actually adopted very strict definition of emergency response. For example, if the funding is allocated for emergency humanitarian situation, and it means that this fund cannot be used for other purposes such as a development project. But in reality, in a conflict situation, sometimes it's very hard to separate the two sectors. And we have seen that even for organizations such as ICRC, they emphasize more about the nexus between development and humanitarian issues. So in many cases, they are closely linked with each other. And with this strict division between humanitarian and development, then it also makes China's engagement maybe less flexible when it comes to cooperation with international non-governmental organizations or international humanitarian access. So I think China is still in the process of learning how to engage with the international humanitarian community, which is which has not only national government concerns of the country or national governments, international agencies such as UN agencies, but also a lot of international non-governmental agencies such as Doctors Without Borders and ICRC, IFRC. How to deal with these non-state actors has been a challenge for China, and I believe China is also learning to deal with these kind of humanitarian actors. Because according to the latest regulations on China's foreign aid, which was in effect in October, they do mention that the South-South Cooperation Fund also can be used to sponsor social groups. This is in Chinese language, which means basically non-governmental organizations. So we can see it's, although maybe the process is slow, but I guess China is also learning well, cooperating with other humanitarian actors. With regard to the tech issue, it is increasingly emphasized the role of technologies, the role of UAV. Digital payment is also more and more used in humanitarian action, and remote programming like online conferences and all that is also used by humanitarian organizations. and cash programming, which is related to digital payment. So there are a huge space for Chinese companies to contribute. So they should shift from just a source of funding to actually a partner of humanitarian action. And as our speaker already mentioned, there may be different definition of data protection, privacy, how to narrow the gap or the distance between maybe China and the international humanitarian community is a challenge for both sides, as the humanitarian community also recognizes the importance of China, as China is willing to expand its role. So another key issue I'd like to raise is that China tends to focus on COVID-19 response since last year in its humanitarian action. However, it is also important to recognize that there are also humanitarian needs arising from COVID-19 crisis, like education, like food needs and all that. Well, it's understandable that it's very convenient for China to focus its humanitarian aid on health-related assistance. But to become a major or important actor of the humanitarian world, it is also necessary to deal with other needs as well. So that's my engagement or intervention. So I'd like to give the floor back to our chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You've raised many really important and I would say structurally deep issues that are concerning humanitarian aid in China. And before we start our public discussion, I would also address two questions for you and for our three presenters. Sorry. So the first question is concerning the structure of Chinese humanitarian aid, because you've mentioned in your speech that there is a strong focus on food and health issues, but a lesser attention to maybe politically related issues such as shelters. Is it somehow related to Chinese general policy, or is it just an accident? And another thing is concerning Chinese image, because again, we have a certain perception of China and of Chinese humanitarian aid, and I guess sometimes even Chinese good initiatives are covered in the media as you know, a way for China to gain something from the story. For instance, Chinese aid, Chinese health aid, and Chinese assistance in health issues during COVID was sometimes presented as mask diplomacy and as an attempt of China to get benefits, to get some real points and political points from the story. And I guess in this sense, when we're talking about humanitarian aid and using digital technologies as well, there is an issue of China threat and China fear that we cannot ignore. What would be your response on this? And could non-state actors be a way out of this problem? So it is not China's government that is assisting other countries, but companies or universities, or some maybe a politically less frightening story. Thank you.
Sure. I would like to do, how to say, I would like to make a start, on those questions. And the first one is about whether it's Chinese principle not to get involved in those the political or the social issues in terms of whether Chinese foreign aid in general or the Chinese humanitarian assistance. I think to put it simple, I think we can say that it is because of the Chinese the fundamental principle or general principle on the foreign aid product delivery, that is not to interfere or being seen as interfering in the domestic issues, especially the political issues of the recipient countries. So that is a non-interference, the policy. And the second is that the Chinese government, they kept insisting that their foreign aid their aid provision does not have the political strings attached, no political string attached. So I think these two has been embraced by the Chinese government as the key, as the two key principles underpin the Chinese foreign aid delivery. So I think that's also the case why China is hesitant in providing humanitarian assistance in those like the political or social the disasters in recipient countries. So you see, they are more comfortable in providing the assistance for those natural disaster the relief. Yeah. So this is the first my answer to your first question. Regarding your first question, that is even sometimes the China conducts some good aid projects, but the media coverage is quite mixed. Yeah. I think there are some reasons why the media coverage about the Chinese foreign aid projects are very mixed, or sometimes could be very negative. Yeah, I can think of a few reasons. Number one is that I think it is true that compared with the some or even many traditional donors, there is much that China needs to be done in terms of the promoting its aid transparency. Yeah, for example, releasing more the data on Chinese aid, such as the breakdown of the Chinese aid to individual country by year and by sectors. Currently, or so far, I think the Chinese government, they have just released 3 white papers on foreign aid, and those 3 white papers just provide a very general overview about the Chinese foreign aid. But I think more transparency, more details will be helpful to improve the Chinese image and also to reduce sometimes some unnecessary suspicions. So this is the first reason that is related to the transparency. I think the second possible reason related to the portraying that the Chinese foreign aid could be this intensified, as I mentioned, those intensified the geostrategic competition between China and traditional donor states. To be frank, I think donors they are now become more and more open in competing for influence using aid. For example, the China set up the CITICA, the new aid agency, and using foreign aid a diplomatic tool to support its Belt and Road Initiative, and also for traditional donors such as the US, they have also, and also countries such as Japan, they have also, proposed, or they have also released their respective the aid policies just to compete with China. For example, compete with Chinese Belt and Road, the initiative in areas, especially in the infrastructure. So I think this could be another reason. And regarding your third question, that is the Chinese NGOs, non-government organizations involvement in Chinese the foreign aid and also in Chinese humanitarian assistance. I think what we have observed in the past 3 or 4 decades is that the Chinese government, the position on the NGOs involvement, on their own NGOs involvement in international humanitarian operations has evolved over time. And they have evolved from a position, that means in the beginning they were opposed to Chinese, the NGOs involvement, to acquiescence. And now, I think more recently, they become more and more, the supportive of the Chinese NGOs playing a big role, or playing a more important role in international humanitarian assistance. But I think for the Chinese NGOs, they still face a lot of the challenges, such as language barriers, such as the capacity constraint. So I think there is still a long way to go. And as Lina has mentioned, I think China is still doing by learning. And this is also true for the Chinese NGOs, the NGOs, non-government organizations, they're also doing by learning. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, what we know about China for sure is that China is learning very fast. So we're expecting new tendencies here for sure. Okay, Alexandra and Veronica, do you have any comments on this?
I may add that while NGOs, of course, are learning, private companies and universities try to engage as well. But here we will see this ethical issues, concerns, and it is not only about China, as we mentioned as we showed in the last slide. When the American company Palantir tried to cooperate with the World Food Program, the human rights observers and enthusiasts in the sphere also protested again this partnership and called for more transparency when it comes to data sharing in humanitarian organizations. I guess countries will focus more on elaborating the rules of game in the sphere of data sharing, and that is why there is also some stumbling blocks for China's companies' involvement as well. But interestingly, Alibaba partnership with the World Food Program didn't raise such concerns. It was responsible for technical part, machine learning, artificial intelligence, and it received only positive feedback. As for China's image, I may add some other comments. We may see that within its newly established initiatives, newly established frameworks, where China tries to use digital technologies as well, it largely relies on multilateral formats, on sharing technologies, and more importantly, knowledge with developing countries, and through this narrative of South-South cooperation, achieving sustainable development goals, China may improve its image as well.
Thank you. I would like to add some comments too, especially about the Chinese threat, which you have mentioned. I would like to say that the fact that China is trying to develop its humanitarian activities within new ways, so that not just through classical way by governmental agencies, but through participation in international organizations, in its own projects, in digital humanitarian aid. It is a very positive trend, as it helped to reduce the fear of China, to reduce the fear of Chinese threat, because it makes this way of these activities of humanitarian aid more visible and more transparent for international community and for other actors, so that I can conclude that it is extremely positive trend in Chinese policy and humanitarian aid. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Lina Gun, please.
A few more points from me is that also a response to your question about like what contribute to the success of humanitarian aid and all that. In my view, it is very important to match what you offer with what's needed on the ground. So that's an issue in China's previous approach, I would say, because of constraints in manpower or other issues. I think China, in some cases previously, were not or should enhance its communication with the recipient, like what is really needed and what can China offer to match the two ends. And a recent development, I think, demonstrate the awareness of the need to enhance communication from what China and ASEAN, the region, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, reached in, I think, October or December, is that with the permission or agreement of the host countries, CECAM may open some offices in some Southeast Asian countries. So in this way, China can understand what's really needed in the recipient countries. In this way, I think China can improve the impact or reception of Chinese aid on the ground. And the second factor has to do with the channels of distribution. As we have mentioned already, China's aid has been state-centric despite the nascent role of non-state actors. Means it's largely still the state. And when it's through the government-to-government channel, and if the host government or the recipient government has some image issue domestically, and then it can also lead to question or suspicion of the aid delivered through this governmental channel. And with regard to the linkage between humanitarian aid and national interest, actually state humanitarianism has always been an issue. It does not only unique to China, but to other donors as well. So it's always controversial, but if you talk to humanitarian practitioners on the ground, then many people will say, as long as we receive need and relieve the immediate human sufferings on the ground, it's acceptable in some situation or to some extent. That's only my personal view. And how to deal with the concern about China's not China, but how to deal with the issue of data protection, privacy, etc. I think a possible way is to engage the more neutral platforms, such as the UN agency or regional organizations. I think that's what has been doing or going on between China and UN agencies already. And as mentioned by our two speakers, the collaboration or partnership between Alibaba and World Food Program. And recently or last year, a warehouse of the UN was opened in Guangzhou. So that's my addition to the discussion. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Dear friends, do you have any questions to our speakers? Maybe we haven't discussed some crucial points still.
Director, maybe.
You may ask a question, but I would ask I would ask other participants to raise their hands just in order to make this discussion more, comfortable for all participants. So, UUT, please, the floor is yours.
Well, yeah, I mean, if that will be the question, then no, not for me, because it's more like a comment to our discussions. So maybe we can other questions goes first, and then if we
you can make your comment. That's no problem.
Oh, yeah, okay, great. Thanks a lot, and nice to see you back after the summer school. My comment would be thank you so much first for the other two groups of discussants, and also as well as Professor Gong. Basically, I just learned a lot, especially on the digital part of Chinese humanitarian aid programs. You go dive into the details of the use of drones, big data stuff. And then as I compared with other readings, I just learned, I just found first, in the long run, to improve the problem of public image question, I would highly recommend a report prepared by William Mary College. Their 8 data lab basically analyzed over 10,000 Chinese projects overseas. and discussing the advantages and the disadvantages of them. Although it of course had a certain agenda serving US interests, we can also learn a lot of lessons from that report. That, like, for example, I guess Professor Gong was mentioned, we have to match the need of the locals with the strategic designing of the humanitarian aid. And I am not going to go over with that report. The second point I would like to make is maybe framing the story of Chinese aid. We need to avoid the assumption that one superpower could cover could provide alone the public goods to the world, right? I mean, that was exactly kind of the dialectic trap initiated by the US. Like, they're saying, okay, so providing public goods will be a competition, and I guess we have to avoid that great power competition dimension, but instead really diving into the real need of the people around the world. And yeah, if everybody is interested, I would love to share the report I read about the humanitarian aid of China. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I guess you could send it to the chat or to us. Actually, I think that would be a great contribution to the whole discussion. And as for great power competition, I guess it is not only one country that can stop it. It's just a more complicated process. So let us see how it goes on. Please,
dear colleagues. Nice to meet you. Thank you all for brilliant presentations. I really enjoyed it. And actually, for me, it's like a new context. It was really, really interesting because now I'm staying in the European Union. And what I'm interested about that here in the European Union, all politics, all issue is about measuring. Measuring, is it effective or not effective? How to understand whether the politics was effective or not. And in this sense, I really keen on to know, are there, for instance, some particular criteria of the effectiveness of this aid? Because it's really difficult to measure their aid, the influence of aid, and whether here's some classifications in Chinese research, and maybe I also can read it and compare it to the European Union's ones. Thank you.
Sure, can I make a start? I think regarding, can you hear me?
Yeah, everything's fine.
Yeah, thank you. I think regarding this is a really good question about the measuring, and I think that for China, they have developed their own system of for all the aspects of the foreign aid, including the feasibility study or measuring or the after project the maintenance. And I'm afraid that their engagement or their alignment of measuring with those the measures from the traditional the DEC members could be quite limited, and my general sense is that it's not only about measuring but also about the Chinese the foreign aid in general. My general information is that now we have like two China has created more like a parallel system. The traditional donors, they have their own foreign aid system. But for China, now it seems that they're very happy with their own foreign aid. They're very satisfied with their own foreign aid program. So it just become like two parallel the systems. And I expect that as again, we have to, I think we can never escape the geopolitics. Yeah, because foreign aid is just part of the foreign aid serves every donor country's their national interest. So there itself, foreign aid is part of this type of the geostrategic competition. Now, because of the intensified geostrategic competition, I'm afraid that it has become more and more prominent that we have two parallel systems. And for the two sides, China, especially China as the largest emerging donor, and then those established traditional donors, at least for many of them, now because of this geostrategic competition, the two sides, they have less interest to engage and learn from each other. I know it's quite sad, but this, to me, I think, but this is the reality. And I expect that this type of trend is expected to continue, at least in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from our speakers in discussion? Yeah, I guess the issue of efficiency is really a tricky one in terms of humanitarian aid, because on the one hand, efficiency could be viewed in a narrow terms, right? So is the problem solved? But on the other hand, in geopolitics terms, there is a question: is a recipient country following donors' policy, and in this sense, or doing something the donors ask? In this sense, it's very hard to measure this efficiency, and we are kind of in this notion trap, I would say. Okay, thank you.
Sorry, can I just add one quick point? That actually, I think what you have mentioned is really important. That is the views from the recipient countries. I think we have to, for on many occasions, we have talked too much from the donors, whether China or traditional donors' perspective. I think we need to have more discussions focusing on the recipient countries, such as what are their genuine needs. So what are their reactions or their responses to the foreign aid programs, including humanitarian assistance from donor states. So I think we need to have more the discussion from the recipient country's perspective. Thank you.
Yeah, that is a great point. I think there are no other questions, so we would finish our discussion with this idea, and maybe next time we'll be organizing humanitarian aid seminars. We would also ask participants from recipient state countries to join, and I guess that is a great idea, and we'll have a more comprehensive picture. Thank you very much. I guess this discussion was really interesting for all of us, and we've learned a lot. Thank you, and I guess we'll continue our cooperation in the future, and nice to see you all, and have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Goodbye.